Hello and welcome, Moonflower. Welcome to the final episode of 2023. This is your cozy seasonal rituals to celebrate the winter solstice. I've got a cozy cup of winter spice tea. I've got a chocolate peppermint cookie. Whenever I record, I have these things and then I never actually drink or munch on them. So I'm committing to it. And I hope that you have some snacks with you regardless of how you're listening in. Usually I like to knit. That's a new thing that I've been liking doing as I record these episodes, but I've got too many things here. But maybe you're knitting along or you're crafting along or you're walking along as you listen in. So cozy in, and thank you so much for being here. If you are watching on YouTube, just know that I am kind of shifting to the right with my eyes because I do have a little bit of a script just so that I stay on track. So if you're new around here, thank you so much for stopping by. In these seasonal rituals episodes, which there are for each seasonal celebration along the wheel of the year, if you look back at past episodes, the intention is to offer you creative and cozy ways to celebrate this seasonal transition. If you don't know what Yule is, I'll talk about that. If you don't know why turning to seasonal rituals might be supportive, well, because it's fun. Living in tune with the seasons is a beautiful way to find a bit more ease, acceptance, and flow in your life, to use those buzzwords, instead of just running on the same setting, so to speak. The energy found in winter is very different than the energy found in summer, and so through honoring this seasonal transition through rituals will mean that you are marking this transition and honoring the fact that you too also go through your own seasonal shifts. And that moving through the winter will probably mean that you have to change the way that you care for yourself, the way that you move through the world, the way that you schedule your life. And seasonal rituals are a really fun way to create that anchor, to tune in, to find connection, and to also connect with your creative and intuitive and magical self. All right, sip of tea time. If you're not new around here, welcome back, my friend. I'd like to mention now that your best way to show your support for this podcast is to either subscribe wherever you're listening or watching, sharing this podcast with a friend, and if you're watching on YouTube, please comment below. Tell me which rituals you loved from this episode, which rituals you personally might be moving through at this time, or requests for future episodes. So if you're a regular listener to the show, maybe you're very well versed in seasonal rituals for the winter solstice, and if so, how wonderful that you are here, and I hope that this episode simply serves as a cozy soundscape to your own winter solstice celebrating. There are 3 components to these episodes. First, I'll talk about the general energies, symbols, and themes you might notice around this time and how those might be carried with you along your self-care journey this coming winter. Second, I'll offer what I like to call a lunar forecast, which is an overview of when the new moons and full moons will be taking place in the next 6 weeks, so you can plan accordingly. And if you're like, plan accordingly, lunar living is another layer to what I was mentioning around the ease and flow that can be found in being in tune with the external cycles. Many folks who are highly sensitive, creative, and earth-loving find a lot of support in turning to the wisdom of the moon and infusing her lessons into the way that you care for yourself and schedule your intentional and gentle growth. You can learn more about that in my free resource that I've created called In Tune with the Moon, which you will hear more about later on in the episode. But back to the format of this episode. After the lunar forecast, I'll end with my suggestions on some seasonal rituals that you could turn to at this time. These are simply suggestions and in no way prescriptive. It's about offering you ideas that you either use or use as a jumping off point to create your own rituals. So without further ado, let's explore the ways that you can connect with your winter solstice. Welcome to the Moonflower Path podcast. This space is for the highly sensitive, the creatives, the earth-loving, the caregivers, the weirdos, the feelers, the change makers, and dreamers of the world. Here, we are all about guiding you to trust your body intuition so you can find home and shift culture. Through the exploration of somatic practice, self-care, and seasonal ritual, my hope is that you will be inspired to be in harmony with yourself and in a dance with the earth. I'm your host, Carolyn, and I'm so honored and grateful to be here with you today. The wheel of the year is a cycle. It is the representation of all the different phases that all of nature, as well as you, moves through in life, in intentional and beautiful and creative expansion and growth. So the winter solstice is the beginning. So one of the words that you might find when you're learning more about the winter solstice is the word rebirth. And within that concept is the idea that we must die before we are reborn. I know that these are very big words and it might sound very dramatic, but if we bring it back to the simplicity, we're moving through this transition of one thing ending and something else beginning. This is not rocket science. We're all very familiar with the idea of new year, new me, new beginnings. How are you going to really commit to your New Year's resolutions? The reminder that I love when it comes to turning instead to the wisdom found in the winter solstice is that there is time. There is a slowness found in the wheel of the year, that between now and the next seasonal celebration, there are 6 whole weeks. There's no need for you to start acting upon any sort of dreams or desires or goals that you might have right away. That there is time for you to dream. There is time for you to take time to tune into what is it that you want? What is it that your body wants? What is your intuition here to tell you? And these are all different themes and explorations that I know I myself notice around this time. So the idea of rebirth, the idea of leaning into and letting yourself dream. I mean, the nights are long because this is a time for us to sleep more and for us to rest and to turn inwards. And with that comes the opportunity. You're offered this time and this space with the natural environment that is created at this time of not only more darkness, but also of a quietness. Have you ever stepped outside after a full night of snow, like a whole night where it's just snowed and snowed and snowed, and then it finally stops? And there's the remaining of those few snowflakes that are drifting down. But for the most part, all there is this blanket of snow over the world. And have you ever noticed the quiet that is found when you step outside after freshly fallen snow? There's a quietness found at this time. And I believe that that is an environment that is created very specifically for many reasons, is to let yourself tune into what is it that you want? What is it that your body needs? What is it that your intuition is here to tell you? Cocooning is another theme, another energy that I really like to lean into at this time. This idea of turning inwards, this idea of creating comfort inside of yourself and your body, but also in the space that you occupy in your home, so that you can, again, lean into what is transitioning here. What am I leaving behind to create space for new? What is the new? What is to come? I don't know, and it's okay if you, and maybe you don't know. Maybe you don't have the answers to those questions right away, which brings me back to let yourself lean into moving slowly, to taking your time around knowing what it is that you're going to even want, to follow, to meander, to explore, to dream, to ponder, to contemplate. And really your job, I think, during these first few weeks of winter is just to listen, to pay attention. The final theme or symbol or energy or whatever you want, whatever word you want to use to label these, is this welcoming back of the light. You most likely know this if you have been turning to the wisdom found along the wheel of the year for a little bit of time, but I'm going to say it anyways because you might be a newcomer to this whole world of seasonal living and seasonal rituals. The winter solstice, yes, does mark the longest night of the year, but what it also marks is the welcoming back of the sun. A really encouraging thought at this time, if you don't necessarily love the darkness found during the winter, is that as the days go on, the days lengthen by about 2 minutes every day. So if we do some quick math, what that would mean is from the winter solstice until, let's say, a month from December 21st, and we land till about January 21st, that's 30 days. 30 times 2 is 60, which means that a month from now, that the days will be a whole hour longer. That's a really encouraging thought. And the symbolism found and pulled from that is that you too are welcoming back your inner light. That you took time at the end of the past year to shed your old skins, to let go, to release the things that you don't want to carry with you in the new year, which leaves space for, okay, so what is your inner light actually telling you? What even is your inner light? Do you have other words to describe what that part of you might be? You're passionate, you're creative, you're kind, you're magical, you're awe-filled, you're childlike, you're wise, your intuitive self. In what ways are you welcoming that part of you back? And diving deep into the depths of the dark to gently beckon those parts of you back. Your hope, your resilience, your desire to create impact in small or big ways. Take your time to welcome those parts of you back at this time. Lean into and welcome the opportunities that this season is offering you to listen to what those parts of you might be wanting for your life in this next year. Okay, took another bite of my cookie because I'm trying to stay committed to that. So serious, so serious about eating my cookie. I'm trying to stay committed to eating my cookie during this recording, just so that I can me myself be in the cozy vibes as I hold space for you and your coziness in listening to this episode. Okay, so lunar forecast time. So the winter solstice, of course, is on December 21st, the longest night of the year. So this is a really nice time to gaze up to the moon. And how wonderful that a few days after the winter solstice, there is a full moon. So on December 26th will be the first full moon after the winter solstice, the first full moon that marks this new cycle. So this is a celebratory time. Hopefully you'll be able to see the moon outside your window, maybe even bundle up and go and take a look at her and let her fill you up with the magic of this time. And then the year 2023 ends under a waning moon. So allow yourself to lean into that slowing down of energy as you hold space for the end of your year. And then let yourself linger in the waning moon energy, the waning moon being the darkening of the moon, that slowing down, that pulling back of doing. And then on January 11th is the first new moon of 2024. So the new moon on January 11th is actually going to be a super new moon. So although you will not be able to see her, she will be in her closest approach, which is also called its perigee, to the earth. A potent time to set lunar intentions at the beginning of the year. And then the first full moon of the year will take place on January 25th, carrying you into our next seasonal celebration happening on February 1st, called Imbolc. Amongst many things, the moon reminds us of the importance of your tender parts, your intuitive self, your body's wisdom, your cyclical nature, your sensitive self, your creative soul, your sensual self, and your wildness. So please, Moonflower, let yourself take your time. There's no rush to entering into the new year, hitting the ground running. Remember the symbols and energies and invitations of this coming season. Give yourself permission to dream, nurture your relationship with your intuitive body, and to take your time. Hello, gentle listener. Carolyn here, interrupting today's episode to tell you about our new free resource called In Tune with the Moon. Learn to listen to, trust in, and honor your body intuition so you can feel empowered to take up space in your life with the moon by your side every step of the way. This free resource includes digital moon phase calendars. So that's pretty phone wallpapers and widgets that have a moon phase calendar on them from now until the end of the year, and they'll be updated in the new year. 4 lunar ritual videos that are about 30 minutes in length and always follow the same comforting ritual of some gentle yoga, some meditation, and some lunar-inspired journal prompts. And yes, these are cozy and accessible. All bodies, all mobility levels are very much welcome. And a digital lunar journal to deepen your relationship with yourself and the moon. By downloading this resource, you'll also begin to receive our monthly Moonflower journal, filled with cozy and seasonal self-care resources. Have I mentioned that it's all for free? Get in tune with the moon as well as with yourself by clicking the link in the show notes or visiting our website, themoonflowerpath.com. And then we end this episode with some seasonal rituals. So I've got quite a list here because I've been doing this for a little while. This will be the 4th year that I offer this community some seasonal rituals to move through at this time. So some of these are going to be familiar and some of these are going to be new. The first invitation that I wanted to offer you is one that we haven't really talked a whole lot about in this space, but is a really big component of my own practice. So I thought that it was time to at least just plant the seed of that being something that we explore more of in this podcast, and that is to create altars. And the reason that I wanted to talk about it now during the Winter Solstice episode is because, like I said, this is the beginning. So this is a really nice opportunity to start things that you actually want to continue throughout the rest of the year. So if you're new to creating altars, an altar is simply a physical representation of that which you want to honor. You may be familiar with altars in a more religious capacity, yet their support can be translated into any spiritual practice, like turning to the Wheel of the Year and celebrating that as your spiritual practice. You can choose any sort of items that really speak to you to place there on your altar for whatever period of time suits you. I think I'd really like to dedicate an entire episode to talking about altars, so I'm not going to talk too much in detail about them today. But this is a gentle invitation to carve out a little space in your home to honor the changing of the seasons and what you wish to invite into your life during this season and the seasons to come. For example, I've got mine set up here in my office. So if you're watching on YouTube, I'm just going to show you. I don't have anything on it yet because of the fact that the winter solstice is coming and I haven't taken time yet to celebrate my own winter solstice rituals. So I have a desk that has little cubby holes in it. And so I wanted this to be where I keep my altar, but I also wanted it to be able to move with me depending on where I'm going to be in my home or outside when I'm practicing my seasonal rituals. So it's actually just a Tupperware container that I've put a nice piece of fabric on top. And then this is where I like to place my items. Usually, so I do have a candle here. So usually I like to have a candle in the center, and the candle changes depending on the season, choosing colors that kind of fit my mood. I have candles that have pressed flowers in them, or sometimes I use a beeswax candle, depending on the season. And then there's so many other items that you can put on your altar. You can choose crystals that will help support you during that season. You can place tarot cards that represent the energies that you're hoping to invite in for that year. I usually like to place like natural items on the altar. Maybe that's moon water. So that's water that has been put out under a full moon or a new moon, or acorns during autumn, or flowers during the summer. I even once found a fallen bird's nest and I put that on my altar during the spring. There's so many other things. You can put different figurines on the altar, and ultimately, I love the idea of an altar because it's yours and it's very intuitive. There's no kind of specific structure that it needs to find. There's no mandatory objects that need to be placed on it. But then the act of setting it up at the beginning of that season and then changing it as the seasons go by and as you celebrate different Wheel of the Year celebrations is a really nice practice to get into the habit of doing. And it's also it's just fun. So maybe that is something that you pull into your seasonal rituals during this winter solstice, again, because it's the beginning. So it's a nice time to start it. And then as the year goes on, you'll be able to see how the altar blossom and changes as the year goes on. But I will say now at this point that there's no pressure here. If maybe you build it at the beginning of the year and then it doesn't change throughout the whole year, that's okay. If you're listening to this episode and you feel like it's like, quote, too late and it's no longer, quote, the beginning, that doesn't matter. You could start an altar at any old time because this is your practice, it's nobody else's, and you get to make the rules. So, first invitation, build an altar to celebrate the seasonal transition. And then the other seasonal rituals that I have in mind, I'm not going to talk about them too much in detail because I actually have some free resources for you to peruse on the blog post associated with this podcast episode. One of the rituals that's a really beautiful thing to do at this time is to watch the sunrise. This really beautiful symbolism of welcoming back the light, but it's also just really good for you. Yes, the nights are long, the days are short, and mental health-wise, that can be quite challenging for some folks. We need sunlight. Our bodies actually need sunlight. So to make a point of taking a look at the sunrise, stepping outside as the sun rises, or if you're driving into work or your morning commute happens, to take a few moments to pause, gaze at her, quite literally to let your face soak in the sunshine, and that will hopefully help you feel a bit more supported during this season. So really nice ritual to add into celebrating the winter solstice. So the second ritual that you could move through at this time is to have a beautiful hot bath with pine needles in it. Why pine needles? I mean, why not? It smells delicious. It's at the forefront of all of the greenery that we see at this time. And it's the best source of color found in the natural world. As all of the other leaves have fallen off the trees, it really creates this beautiful landscape for the greenery of the pine trees to really shine through. So the invitation would be to pick some pine leaves off of your nearest pine tree. Maybe you put them directly in the water or you put them in like a little cloth bag so that you don't get covered in pine needles. And the smell is wonderful. Also, water is really healing. And at this time, if you find that seasonal transitions are kind of unsettling or ungrounding, let yourself just soak in the healing vibes of a hot bath. And then the next ritual, because we love the idea of setting new intentions, setting goals at this time, but it can sometimes feel like a very pressure-filled practice to do so, you could take some time to turn to a Yule tarot card spread. If you want, you can turn to the resource that I've shared in the link in the show notes, where there's a very specific one that I like to do at the winter solstice, so you can click the link there. But maybe it's just pulling 3 cards or pulling 1 card and seeing what message is found here for you to invite into the beginning of the year. Another thing that's really fun to do at this time is feeding land. So what I mean by that is this time can feel lacking in life. We don't see a lot of life found in the plants that are outside or in the birds that we see or in the animals that we see, but they're still there. They're just being a bit more mindful in terms of how much time they're spending outside. So one way to invite a bit more life into your yard is to feed the land. So you can put out bird feeders, you can create bird feeders, squirrel feeders, hang them in trees. And this is also just a really fun thing to do if you have kids, or I also don't have, but I don't have kids, and it was really fun to do with my partner. So that's one of the things that you can do, and that is a ritual because you're connecting with the natural world. And not only are you connecting with it, but you're reciprocating with it. We get so much from the natural world, from the earth. She supports us in so many ways, and this is a really nice way to give back. And then the last invitation is to get into the kitchen. There are so many fun things to cook and bake at this time. Yes, it's Christmas time, but there's some really wonderful things that have traditionally been made around this time, around the winter solstice. One of them is to make wassail or spiced apple cider. And this tradition comes from not only folks making this around this time, but they would make it and then they would bring it to the forest, dance around and sing and pour it at the base of the trees as a way of ensuring good harvest for the following year. So making wassail is really fun. And then the two other recipes that I have for you by, again, clicking the link in the show notes is to make a pizza bun wreath. So I realize that this is probably not customary and there's probably not a lot of tradition found in making a pizza bun wreath. But the thing that I really like about making this at this time is that I can make shapes that are symbolic of the winter solstice. And the one that I'm feeling really inspired by this year is spirals. In the past, I've made like sun shape, or I've made a wreath shape or a tree shape, but this year I think I'm going to make a spiral because this idea of seasonal living is one that honors this spiralistic and cyclical way of being a human in the world, of being a human of the natural world. So I've got a recipe for that. It's vegan if you're interested. And then the final recipe that I have for you is to bake with rosemary. So I've got a vegan lemon rosemary shortbread cookie recipe for you in the link in the show notes. And how are these things rituals? Well, I believe that a ritual is anything that connects you with what it is that you are hoping to honor. That's it. It's about connecting with whatever transition you're moving through in a creative and a playful and an intentional way. So if that means getting into the kitchen, if that means taking a hot bath, if that means drawing, if that means journaling, if that means pulling tarot cards, if that means looking up at the sun or watching the sunset rise, it really doesn't matter what ritual you choose. It's really just about letting this be an opportunity to celebrate the transition that not only the external world is going through, but that also you are as well. So hopefully this offers you a fun list, and if it was like kind of all over the place the way that I shared the list, then you can find a more concise list in the show notes and also by clicking to the blog post associated with this episode. All the links to all the resources that I shared are found there, and I hope that they really serve you well because they have, at least for me. I think it's really, really fun. I think it's really nourishing. And I think it's also a really nice connecting thing to do because maybe you do them by yourself, but hopefully you also do some of these rituals with friends or family members. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, this is the final episode for 2023, and I will be taking a little bit of a break. I'm not quite sure how long, a few weeks, maybe a month, but we will be back. The rest of the business is going into hibernation mode, so there will be no more paid offerings, no more classes, no more rituals, no more gatherings found, at least for a little period of time. Again, I'm not quite sure how long, but I'm really looking forward to seeing how the shifts that I'm going through in my own personal life, transitioning away from running this business full time to on a more part-time basis, will shift the ways that I show up in this space and how I can support you. So if you want to follow along for that ride, then make sure to subscribe to not only this space here, but also registering to the newsletter, because that is going to be where I'm the most vocal and the most active. But for now, for today, wishing you a really wonderful and magical winter solstice and holiday season. Please rest as much as you can. Lean into the things that fill you up and bring you joy. Please stay committed to the ways that you care for yourself, especially at this time where we're navigating a lot of dynamics, a lot of family dynamics, a lot of plans. So please do as much as you can to stay true to you and your needs and your desires. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening, for hanging out with me this whole past year. And I'm looking forward to connecting with you again in the new year. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Moonflower Path podcast. I'm your host, Carolyn, and ways that you can find more support from me and this cozy community are all found in the show notes. Please consider rating, reviewing, and sharing this podcast with a friend. Those are the best ways to show your support for this free and accessible resource. Wishing you a gentle rest of your day, and I look forward to connecting again with you very soon.